Hi, this is Dean from DCarsonCPA. Historically, we've always used the whiteboards as an opportunity to continually refine our views to matters, to share ideas with you that can be yours to pick up on and take to the next spot, and all of ours for continual improvement. So the frames we have are macro and micro, and they're thinking about the context of where entity, policy, and community meet. That's industry, nonprofit, NGO, government, and communities being individuals and families come together. Most frequently in the domestic frame, look at the domestic economy and needs that are pretty immediate to all of us here. So without further ado, there's a quick slide set of about 5 bullet points related to what remains of third quarter 2020 and fourth quarter 2020. And just thinking about some open ideas here. We're getting back into the swing of things. COVID crisis has been interesting for everyone. We've all used the time in different ways. We've had different points we've been covering it. Some of it was thinking about lesser explored areas with the law enforcement and societal relations. But those are quite important, so it was worth the time that we took, and it did take us off a little while to think about the emergent lines of real challenges to exceptional teamwork, how we can help on that, and how we can also maintain the continuity of a structure which binds and helps us all work together in exceptional teamwork in the framework of our constitutional republic in a time where, in retrospect, what happens is we're suffering from a line of soft leadership on state and local lines, and that's creating a problem because this is a time of a clear and present national crisis. I would call it a national security crisis because you have the health economy with the impacts of COVID and everyone kind of in stay at home or stay in space and limit space, and then a lot of issues related to reporting, which in the future could be improved by getting the statisticians, getting the actuaries, the people who own the numbers, get them out in the fields with the executives from the executive branch that are talking about the crisis and the numbers. If they're on the field explaining with numbers, the owners of the numbers, actuaries, demographers, statisticians, health statisticians, and they can do a much better job, and economists too, health economists, to explain what that really means and what the statistics mean in relation to the past, even if you're in a crisis that's brand new like this one appears to be, where part of what's needed is, well, hey, we've got this forecasted model, this is what we believe it is, and it's big enough and scary enough that we're actually going to grind things to a halt, which is something that no one's ever seen before. And we hope it was all done, in the right way. It's been done globally now, so it's a really different time for all of us. In any event, I'm not going to reiterate that because we know that, but I want to get down to some basic, simple points that we'll probably elaborate more because the style is that we put these up and then we go back and continually improve what we're thinking about. We use it as a method to get it out to you, to have you think about it, so we can follow you, see what you're coming up with, and at the same time we're working on our own development. Two heads are always better than one when you're thinking about problems that in the aggregate help all of us. I'm more than happy to share a process of thought and ideas in the event and hopes that in looking at it, you'll think about it too, because it's not just one smart people, it's many smart people that need to think about these things, put it together and get ideas. And sometimes people feel uncomfortable. There's an underused muscle to really critically analyze what's going on around us and how we can make it different. So I would want that more of us can think about ways to use our intellect to help and to build for improvements on teamwork. So starting right in, this is the time of several cascading crises that I would say qualify as national security issues from my point of view, because a health economy where everyone's uncertain about impacts and what's going on, which needs to be better quantified. There's something really interesting going on here, and it's definitely a concern because the way it's being communicated, we're open to 3 viable thoughts and hypotheses to what's going on here. It's an act of God, possibly. Could be. Pandemic happens as an act of God. Could be the rare thing that gets out like that. Another possibility is we have people we know are working with DNA, and they could have had a willful or an accidental accident, but whatever's been released is an abomination. It's something that's here that's hurting people, and it's got some pretty nasty side effects, and it seems to be the opposite of hemorrhagic fever, meaning that where hemorrhagic fever makes people bleed, this one leads to clotting, and it's having some pretty real impacts. So provided that all the news we see now and we'll have to learn about in the forensics and the after effects is on track, then we have a pretty significant issue to deal with there. We're still looking for better statistics, looking for better reporting from actuaries, from health statisticians, from economists, from demographers, from state comptrollers. Everyone should be on deck quantifying this, looking at it from a year-over-year basis, from this versus other categories in the current year and other categories year-over-year, because there are 3 comorbid conditions they talked about here in New York, being one being high blood pressure, another being diabetes, and another one being high lipids in the blood, which is high fats, may be good for clotting, hypothetically, I think. But since this is a clotting condition, that condition which many might have had who survived in the past, is a complication, because now it's working against them because it's in the same path of that pathogen, whatever the heck it is. Getting into the next thing, the fiscal economy, it's no surprise. The economy's been shut down in many places. In the first part of it, to a certain degree, there's been some good work to cover people, but now there's risk and uncertainty because we're kind of opening, we're not reopening. Some states are experiencing upticks, and it's a lot of uncertainty. So fiscal economy is in a rough condition as of today, 32% contraction on the economy, and that's a concern. How do we help on that? Now, take these two prime conditions, the health economy and the fiscal economy, and then introduce the new challenge we've had about equality. Equality, for me, is a matter of the golden rule. It's ingrained to a matter where it's something I've always been supportive of, doing the best I can to help in teamwork, being individually the best to think about the needs of different people and how we work together. And each person can only help in equality to the extent of who they are and the impact they have. And, you make the world a better place one person at a time. So you look at it, think about what is the way equality impacts what's around you and how can you improve and help. But at the same time, you've also got to fight for your lot and move forward. So a rational line to equality is that we should not be looking to solely race and gender, but we should take every matter of difference in our society, which is race, gender, age, sickness or health, being infirmity or health, poverty or wealth. Take every condition, because in a constitutional republic, and with what was spoken into the Declaration, holding that all men are created equal, and with the evolution of emancipation and civil rights and suffragette, what we have in there as equality is the correct definition that was kind of, in my mind, was coded into the founders' documents, because the way they said all created equal, and they had with them Quakers who were against human bondage, human suffering. So I think it's kind of like source code that you put in and you're forced to look at it every day. And with time, the realization of what you've written supported all those other things. But that's just a way of looking at things and knowing that certain of the founders would have been not supportive of slaveholders, not wanting those type of things. So there's source code in there that we've continually worked to improve. And of course, there are a lot of, rough things that happen, but we cannot solve, with today, we're not going to be able to solve anything that happened yesterday. So the point that I think is most relevant is working on the society we have today, what we can do now, and helping problems with the vision of now to the future. Anyways, there are then, beyond the issue of equality and people having valid concerns about their treatment in communities, and having support from here in terms of equality, and having support in terms of, we believe in treating people equally, but not giving special categories of treatment where people are not being treated equally across the board. Equality is something that's across the board. If we're no different, we're no different. Outliers, the wanton. Out with the protests that we've seen. We've seen the outliers. It's the wanton actors. They're out there, putting at risk health. We've seen safe distance crashing, putting property at risk, damaging property. New York City today, $1 million in damage to 302 NYPD police vehicles, plus cameras, plus spray paint and graffiti, plus the people that are harmed, police officers, citizens, harmed in conflict. And the impact this has to communities. Communities, people are staying at home, they're abiding with the laws and rules. They're not going out and causing this type of problem, but then they see a minority of people going out, and amongst a valid movement, they're finding these people that are going out there, they're causing a lot of chaos, and they're destructors. These are people that are going out to cause destruction in communities, so they're laying a third-level crisis on top of what is health and fiscal economy. Problems are creating outliers who are working against the health initiatives, who are working against economic challenges by adding to the damage and the crisis. And they're working against communities because, quite frankly, there are a lot of good law-abiding people just want to see the economy get back, and we understand that fundamentally without an economy at all, there's not much to discuss. You have to have an economy, you have to have an engine of an economy moving forward before there's even jobs or opportunities. So let's get back to the point that we need people working together in the economy to get the engines moving, and in process, bring through all the things that we've learned, that we talked about, inequality and improving, but also understanding that we come to a structure that's in place, our constitutional republic, the way it works with laws and rules, and that's a structure that we work within. So when you want change, you don't have the right to go out and, crash health, destroy property, and put communities at risk. What you do is you go through the lawful process of the government, the executive, legislative, and judicial branch, and what should be a healthy and functional line. And we're going to talk about that a little bit because having this experience has given us some insight to what needs to help to improve and ways that you and I and everyone can just work together a little bit better on that. Okay, next down, a little bit repeat of what we just said. Unity needs, law enforcement, and communities. This is critical and relates into the rule of law, law and order, and societal bonds. If you think about it, law and order in a civil society is the connection of people and a will of the people to be governed by ascribing to a system of laws, rules, and government. Now, where there may be flaws in that, definitely that's true. Any process that's human in creation is subject to a place of continual improvements. We can always get better, and there are real issues of inherent biases and things historically that have been there. But the point is that if the rules are constructed and enforced correctly, if they're continually reviewed, then what should be happening is we should be working for the equality of all, that none should be treated differently or left behind, that all who are working together as Americans in exceptional teamwork should be working to move the team together. It may be a high and lofty ideal to think that we all do that now, but if we are all inclined to help on that line, what's going to happen is the center of the curve, we're always going to have a bell-shaped curve. It's going to be the middle of the curve, people with compliance that want to do and get things done, and the outliers in the end and the other end. One end may believe much more should be done, the other end believes it should go the other way. In any event, as long as the majority of us are under the bell-shaped curve, we will be moving forward to the best conditions we can have. And that always gets better and better because knowledge improves. People develop relationships, and one consequence of the health economy and having everyone locked up is people are in their own neighborhoods. They're locked up where they are with the stay-at-home, with minimal traverse going outside. People are moving around more and more. They're using bicycles, they're walking around, they're getting out. However, you're still limited to your communities, and that kind of makes a little bit more of a microscopic view. For instance, in New York City, you might live in one place, not see another, and the lack of cross-pollination, which would ordinarily happen in New York City, is a drawback to community relationships, because when we see each other, when we work together, we appreciate each other more, we learn more from one another, and that's why New York City itself is a great place to be in a melting pot. There's a lot of learning from different people in different places. We can bring that together to continual improvements, which is my goal. I never believe perfection is attainable, but I do believe that we have the best system in the world to reach those changes as long as we're working together, trying to communicate and trying to make sure that we're keeping the ball on course for continual improvements. All right, next up here, we've got a need for strong executives. Now, anyone that's observing the economy right now could say there's some good and bad leadership out there. On state and local level, where we've seen conflicts with law enforcement and communities, unfortunately what we've seen is weak leaders who sometimes feel the need to capitulate to a mob beyond the point of reasonableness, which is in equality, there's most definitely a reasonable point to say, for all Americans, we want equality, okay? We understand that there are historical issues that were there. Some of those issues can be carried forward because human behavior is carried forward for years and years, and it's a learning process, and it's an education process. You need to get people working together, talking together, learning together. And as you do that, you educate communities about the differences and the truth that we are not that different. We're all God's children, so underneath the same things, but we have dealt with some different things. So it is very important to learn from one another, but that doesn't mean that you or I are greater or lesser. It just means we're human beings. We've got to work together, and I believe the exceptional condition is we work together to understand each of who we are and build to the middle, and that's the only way you're ever really going to get results anyways, because when it factionalizes into this is me, this is you, this is that, and that, that's just divisive. It's not getting anyone anywhere together, and you need to be together to help move the country forward. Into these lines, government, industry, community, all needing strong leadership. Unfortunately, we don't get enough of the unity in leadership, and one thing that happened at state and local level, New York City, New York State, is that the leaders being confronted by upset people and a mob, they lost control of health and the fiscal economy and a sense of rule of law and order. They wanted to agree with the point, which makes sense to say we appreciate this, we're aware of this, but they wanted to go further and pander to a point, which is not helpful because you've now compromised the health economy by letting people go out, crash safe distance, and maybe it was letting steam off that needed to happen, but you let people out, and they crash safe difference. That prolongs the health economic crisis. The fiscal economy, because of a negative outcome of that, the outliers of people who went out to destroy, to break the health, the property in the community, meaning that they went out, crash safe distance got way too close. Property got damaged, the police cars, the public cameras, public property, spray paint, and who knows what else. You'd have to be out to tally it and see it all. And then the community damage, when people are out spray painting, looting, and breaking, that's not without consequence. All monetary add-on damages and civil society add-on damages, because when you create a condition where there's no rule of law and no confidence that state and local government have this covered, then industry and communities feels uncomfortable and at risk, and that may lead to people leaving, people taking money elsewhere, people leaving New York in high numbers, and other states. And what conversely should be happening is government should say, look, we are strong leadership. We understand that there is a law enforcement and community issue, and collective, you're both citizens. So it's not one or the other, it's both. And law enforcement is the connection of the rule of law and will of people to be governed in societal order with individual rights and community needs. It's where the two meet, and it is, in fact, an element of the government and executive branch lines, to a lesser degree legislative and judicial branch, because you have court officers, you have legislative officers, and then you have mostly under the executive branch, and then some under the judicial. I believe the corrections and stuff falls under the judicial line. But in any event, it's in all those units of government, you have law enforcement, and it's correct to say that law enforcement is the point where civil society and our government meet. It's a civil matter. It's not as much in the lines of law enforcement. It's a criminal matter. Most definitely law enforcement is meeting communities, and historically we've always had precincts and community boards, but what we need improved is just the attention to detail in there, and there was a lacking PSA. I think, hindsight is always 20/20, okay, but you look at this situation unfold, and you see that PSA was needed immediately at the time that an issue came up, and what would be very effective and helpful is to say, all right, let's talk about this. We have law enforcement. Law enforcement has a duty to protect and serve. In general words, you could say that happens in every locality, in every state, in every city, and in the nation. When they join, when someone joins law enforcement, or if someone was to join the armed service in a greater extension, they're serving an oath to protect and serve, and that's a common basis of that. Inherent in that is a duty to protect in the sanctity of life. Why do you have law enforcement? To protect people from violent criminal actions, to protect property, to protect rights, and to deal with the outliers where people are, where danger is introduced with two people have competing rights, and to connect people back to the judicial system. And that's a little bit of a mouthful. It's like a full slide here. We're running into 20 minutes. I didn't mean this to be that long, but the PSA that's missing is okay. Law enforcement, its correct position, with a duty to protect and serve, inherently, but now manifestly, it means spoken out. There is a sanctity of life inherent in that. You're not trying to hurt people while you're connecting them. You're trying to do and use minimal force in the process to do that, but reminding that force is proportionate to resistance. And unfortunately, in societies, there's a huge message to resist, where the correct action of law enforcement should be to connect someone who's believed to be an outlier or is an outlier to the judicial process, which is really where those matters get resolved. It's just a conduit point. So to fight and resist in a law enforcement point is not the place. You go to the court, you go to your legislature, and you go to your executive branch. And those are the real places. But instead of owning that, instead of executives standing up and saying, look, we'll work with you, we'll find ways to strengthen this, they just threw law enforcement under the bus. And to throw law enforcement under the bus or communities is wrong in both directions, because they are both subsets of citizenry, of people, and they're an important part, each important, of connecting communities and providing a stable environment in any state, in any city, in any nation. So the other side of the PSA announcement was that in a civil society, citizens have a duty to correspond with a lawful order. And a lawful order could be in order to stop, or you're being questioned for something, you have the right to remain silent. I'm not really meaning to talk about rights here. That was not my goal. But there's a duty, an inherent duty of individuals to comply. And I'm not an attorney, so full disclaimer, anything I'm saying about rights is in context of a societal line. It's not intended to tell you what is a final word there, but the point is a concept. So take the concept of PSA, public safety announcement, law enforcement, duty to serve and protect, inherent duty to the sanctity of life, and risk that is proportionate to forcible resistance. Under a bell-shaped curve, which is again where law enforcement would exist, the majority of us would be under the curve, okay, with, just median values of, compliance and doing the right thing. On one end would be people who feel you don't have to comply with laws and rules, and on the other end might be people who are on the law enforcement end who are very, could be very hard line about what's going on, and somehow we meet in the middle, and that's where society works. In the middle, we go to the courts and stuff, and we have a duty on both ends to work with the outliers that are people who believe that you can disregard the laws and rules of society, and on people on the other end who, may be too harsh in their positioning things. But you got to understand that in the middle, every citizen has an opportunity to de-risk an arrest by working with a line of compliance and saying, okay, I understand this is not a point to make a final statement. A final statement goes to a court. So be patient, deal with what you got to deal with, follow the instructions, then go to the next steps. It's not perfect. Nothing will ever be, but it's probably a lot safer if you just say that we de-risk that. And I think the PSA would create an opportunity for police force, law enforcement, corrections, and communities to speak together about the goals, because I'm going to do that in the next slide because there's just really a lot to think about, and I've put a lot of time in. But remember, that's important. It is part of our initiatives for 3Q and 4Q 20. And then 5, the environment and U.S. industrial, made in USA. Okay, this is important. We got a lot of masks. People are chucking out masks. They're throwing them around. Now you got all this disposable garbage that's going in the environment. You've got no doubt an uptick in the amount of soap that's used to clean goods. And you've got some benefits: less cars, less traffic, better environment. It's natural. Temperatures in New York City are a little bit cooler. I would highly suspect that that's got to do with less people out and about driving in cars. Less traffic means less pollution. But on the other hand, we also have a need to bring back to the U.S. and make in the U.S. the things we were missing in this crisis, like face masks, medicines, sanitation stuff, all that stuff. We need it back here, and we need some national reserve capacity. At least, I would say, 20 to 25% as a minimum reserve of ability for people to make things right here and have it. So if we ever hit a crisis again, at least we've got the oars in the water and the ships to the wheel, the wheels to the paddle boat here, moving to get the stuff going so we can get the crisis faster, resolve it. And all this is much more than 20 minutes, so I appreciate it. If you've listened this much, you got some of the ideas. I'm sorry if they're a little slow. I try to keep these things short, 5 to 10 minutes. And there was a point in here I want to reiterate, is that anything I speak about, I think about anti-policy and community lines, because they connect with financial, legal, technology, and teamwork points if you oversimplify. And then when we get to the points of thinking about rights and rules and stuff, that's more anecdotal things. It's not based on law. For any of that stuff, you need an attorney to go into to talk about that avenue, but it's to talk about an objective property or an element of something where you could get together and begin to talk about it. So hence, if we get into this PSA thing again, what we're talking about here is there's some general conditions of categories that would universally be accepted. I don't think anyone would fight you on the duty to serve and protect. That it's an oath that officers undertake. The inherent sanctity of life, I think that's in there because, why are you protecting and serving? Because inherently people and communities are valuable. So that it's inherent, but if you manifestly state that and you swear to that, there's something in every profession about, swearing that duty that, the individual repeats it. It's also a public awareness to, hey, this is part of our code, so it speaks overtly to that. And then that element with a corresponding duty of citizens to comply with lawful orders, because you can't be sitting there on one side and be running risk and then saying, oh, but it's all on, law enforcement side. If you were met in a condition where you were stopped by an officer and you were questioned or you had some, lawful order that you met, then you have a duty to correspond to it and to answer it in that context. And that's what you want to do. And then if you had any, the correct way to deal with it in a civil society is you go through the constitutional system that we have, and you go through the courts, the legislature, and the executive branch, and you fix it that way, but not the other way. So when I get back to this PSA, this video is run too long, but the key point is communities and precincts together. It already happens, but it needs to happen at a better level, and it needs to be done in a business gap analysis manner where you could say to a community board, what do you expect is going to happen? Okay, we're here. The duty of law enforcement is to connect societal law and order, the expectations of a community in general, to needs, what do you expect different that's going to happen? And then outline the process of an arrest, walk through it. What did you expect would happen? What came out of it? And use that gap as a discussion point. And then review every level of offenses, misdemeanors, and felonies, just so you can have a clear conversation, because there's a disingenuous conversation which is going on hidden in some of these conversations about the rule of law. And certain people take actions. You have to, it's inherent that you know how the law interacts with the actions. And then if you are taking property that's not yours, if you're hurting someone, there's different levels of things, of course, but you got to know what's going on. And I think part of the needed education process is to reconnect communities and precincts to work at a detailed level of what's being asked of law enforcement, and then to work that up, because each community could have a different view. My community might have a different view than your community. The next community might have a different view. Can you imagine the complexity of bringing all these different views for what is the norm? I mean, that's some of what the judicial branch does with laws and rules and how they're treated differently in different sectors of the United States, because they're trying to reflect the community-specific lines. But it's just way out of control, and it's the wrong thing for an executive to throw law enforcement and or communities under the bus. The correct action is to work on teamwork to bring the parts together. And this is just a beginning slide. It's hard to get these things in short words fast. This was a first take. I hope you found a little bit and you could take with you, and you might mull through it and come with something much better and faster for the words. But if you've done that after seeing this, then I'm all but happy. I'm all happy, because what that means for me is that you've taken the lines and you've thought about it. It had you think, and you're working towards improvements. I'm on a team for exceptional teamwork, and that means all of us come together in unity in the constitutional republic to do what we can to make it better. And I think, I hope that the majority of people there, of course, you're not going to have everyone there. Human nature is such that we're all different, and we pop up in many different places. But in the aggregate, it's my hope that through sharing these things, it's productive value to the end goal of having us work better together and using skills that we all have to the best of our ability to produce teamwork and a good environment for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in these United States. Thanks so much. And let you know one other thing, these views I look at, they're here, but I'm also studying the global lines, because I think it's important to think that across the globe there's lots of smart people in different places. So to think about different ideas and how it plays here and somewhere else is important, because perspective can help you. So it's the same as, how's it done in my community? Okay, go to the next community. What's different? Crime is high in my community, go to the next community. Why is it lower there? What are the different actions? Study that and use that knowledge for continual improvements. I'm Dean Carson. I'm here to help make a positive difference on the level of services and levels of applied research and outreach, to help get out there a message, to help empower people to think more about the difference they can make. And if something I've shared gives you an idea for improvements, that's great. It means I've done something good. Have a great day and be well. Dean Carson, be safe and well during the COVID crisis. And we're working together to help build for the economy, to help counter the health crisis, the fiscal crisis, and to work for the unity and teamwork. Thank you.